like to say peace to all the gods on earth and people of the universe. Peace and love. Just wanna let you know the black man's first. Original man. We're gonna drop a little something like this, you know what I'm saying, on how we feel on the real. Check this out. Who tells you when to work? The devil. Who tells you when you get a day off? The devil. Well, who gives you your pay? The damn devil. And who takes it away? The devil. You mean to tell me that we're still not a slave in the land of the free, in the home of the brave? Knowledge cipher divided by power equals wisdom, but you know we have to stop with knowledge first. Divine evils were the first and the hurt situation that we in. Some people saying that we're cursed. The lack of the knowledge of ourselves makes it worse. Science that we drop makes the average head burst. So do the knowledge on the very next verse. I didn't come to conceal it, I come to reveal it. The true and living God with the Son of Man. And if you ever need assistance, just take my hand. Black man, be prepared, cause here comes the clan. Now my great-great-grand was hung on a tree by the colored man. You probably know him as a white man. I seen an Oprah Winfrey show. She said that was in the past, but kiss my... Yeah. Now it's time to teach the people why our people's not treated equal. Here's the next sequel. Now brothers say, why you just in church like that? Cause if church was good for us, it wouldn't be on every block of our neighborhood. Just like a liquor store, it just ain't no good. They represent the 10%. Now mama lover has no loot, but you spend the last dime to make sure a child has an Easter suit. What is this with Christmas? I just can't see. Spending your money, giving the credit to a fat man coming down your chimney. Come on, I just can't see it. It's like TV telling lies to your vision. Auntie daughter's here to make the incision. The soul controller. Yeah, the soul controller. Word is born. The soul controller. The soul controller. Check it.
Come on, the big brother. Amos Wilson. Come on, brother. Yeah. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure again to have been invited to share some time with you this evening and to be able to speak with you a little bit and interact with you a bit, particularly on this Black Solidarity Day, and to talk about consciousness, culture, and power. In some sense, sort of continuing our prior discussion in terms of consciousness, which off the bat to many people may seem somewhat abstract, but it is not an abstract situation. Consciousness is not an abstraction. It is a very concrete presence in the human mind and in our lives as people. One of the things that this culture tries to do very much to the African people is to make us resist abstractions or things that sound abstract. Yet, it is in terms of the abstract that people act, that people actually control their behavior and the means by which people organize their behavior. Take the word nation. Really, what is it in reality? You cannot just find it in any concrete place or circumstance, and yet you can organize whole armies and people around the concept of nation. Nation as a symbol. You can generate all types of emotional feelings. You can move people to sacrifice their lives to give their all in terms of what is essentially an abstraction, nation. And from the abstraction nation, we get the further abstraction nationalism. And yet nationalism has been the symbolic foundation by which means people have organized themselves and overthrown their oppressors, by which means colonialism has been rolled back and people have come to achieve an identity that has permitted them to operate as one and to mutually benefit one and the other. Those who rule us, you see, would like for us not to be comfortable with things that are not immediately concrete, with things that we cannot see in a tangible form or feel with our hands or feel in a material way. They seek to make then the black consciousness a concrete consciousness, to make it just a hands-on consciousness, you see, because that is the consciousness of servants. The consciousness of masters is the consciousness that wrestles with symbols and ideas, that wrestles with mathematics and logic, and uses those symbols to control the world and to change the world and to transform the world, organize it and direct it. Therefore, the masters of this world would like to make us think that abstract thinking is their preserve and not the preserve of those who serve. And many of us as African people have fallen for that kind of distinction. Many of us have tried to define our blackness in terms of our concreteness only, and not in terms of our ability to manipulate symbols and use symbols and manipulate abstractions as means of moving our behavior. The European has sought to make us a concrete people and a people who are only connected to the immediate by disconnecting us from our history and by taking over the responsibility for our past, and therefore making us not responsible for our past or responsible for our future. You see, in order to move into the past, one has to abstract himself or herself from the present, to move from the immediate, and yet to be moved by that which is not immediate, that which is not tangible, but yet in many ways is very important. When you deny then a people a past and a long past, in a sense, in effect, you begin to impair their abstract capacities and their abstract abilities, and you begin to impair their abilities to understand the present and redirect their behavior in the present in terms of the past, in terms of something that is not there in the immediate present. When you rob a people of responsibility for their future, again, rob them of having to move from the present into the future, to use their imagination, to use concepts that are placed into the distant future, and yet look at that future, deal with that future as a means of changing behavior in the present so that that future can be realized or avoided. So consequently, when African people, particularly African American people, were cut off from our past, and when we were made not responsible for our future, when the future was placed in the hands of another people, our ability to act in terms of abstraction, in terms of the not so immediate, but in terms of the future and based on the past, were impaired, and consequently many of us are caught up in the immediate present, in the immediately concrete. We have a short attention span and a short mental span. This is the kind of span for people who have been prepared to be servants, whose role in life is to carry out orders and orders only. If we then are to successfully defeat those people who rule us today, we must change the nature of our mentality to include our capacity to enter into abstractions and guide our behavior in terms of abstractions, to manipulate our consciousness and to manipulate the world in terms of the manipulation of symbols. We must lose our fear of dealing with ideas and concepts that appeared first to be intangible. And consciousness is one of those concepts, which, by the way, while on the surface it appears to be intangible and abstract, is the most concrete thing that we can deal with. I define consciousness as referring to a level of psychological and physiological arousal. So we know right away that consciousness is psychophysiological. That is, it is a combination of psychology and physiology. So it is not something that just floats in the psychological atmosphere. Consciousness is actually a body state. It is a brain state. That is why if you would take a drug, a psychoactive drug, which is a set of chemicals, which are physical, those physical chemicals, when they enter into the brain, bring about psychological changes. That means then brain states, actual physical states, changes in the physical nature of the brain itself brings about psychological experiences and changes and orientations. One of the major reasons we take drugs is to change our consciousness. We use drugs as a means of manipulating our consciousness. When we want to party, we drink a little bit. We get a little high, and we feel like we are ready to party. We can laugh more easily, talk more easily, feel happier, have a lot of fun, and all these kinds of things. So we try to manipulate our consciousness through the manipulation of the chemical nature of our brains. I'm using this illustration to indicate then that consciousness is not a mere abstract psychological state, but it is a psychophysiological state. That the physiological state of the brain is correlated with the psychological state of the mind, and the psychological state of the mind also transforms the physiological state of the brain as well. There is a reciprocal interaction between consciousness and brain state. I spoke here a few weeks ago at the Slave Theater about what we call the multiple personality. We talked about multiple personalities as states of consciousness, each personality representing a different state of consciousness. And we talked about how then one personality, if it had, say, a particular name, say Tom, when it possessed the body of the client, that personality, if orange juice was drank at the time that it was in possession of the body, that personality would function normally. However, if another personality enters the body, the drinking of orange juice would lead to a breaking out of rashes and welts on the body of the individual. And if Tom would come back into the body, if the consciousness of Tom would come back into the body while the rashes and welts were still present, they would begin to disappear immediately. Implying again then that these personalities were not mere states of consciousness, but they were psychophysiological states in that the actual physical nature of the body was correlated with each of the states of consciousness, such that depending on which personality was in possession of the body would have different reactions to the same circumstances or the same chemicals. Many times these multiple personalities may be of different ages as well as characters. So that if you would give, say, a tranquilizer of a certain amount to an adult personality, that personality might become agitated such as when an adult may take speed or something, amphetamine. And yet, in that so-called same body, when the childish personality would enter into the body, the behavior would calm down. Behavior would be tranquilized as such. You can get differences in blood pressure, differences in all other kinds of physiological and psychological orientations, depending upon which consciousness or personality is in possession of the body. In effect, then, you had a different body when you had a different consciousness. And I use that then to illustrate the concrete and abstract nature of consciousness and how the consciousness that we see as typical of us as African Americans today, the kind of diseases, the kind of things to which we are vulnerable as a people, is very much a consciousness that has been implanted in us by those who have power over us, that we as African people have yet to gain true possession of our bodies and of our minds. That the bodies we call our own today and the consciousness which possess the bodies that we call our own today are truly not our own, but are the bodies and minds and mentalities created by those who rule over us and create the consciousness that inhabits our bodies as a people. And we have to recognize then what is going on. And we have to recognize then that consciousness is not a game, and consciousness is not an abstract concept. Consciousness is a real state by which people's bodies and minds are manipulated. And therefore, if we are not the creators of our own consciousness as African people, and if consciousness is the means by which behavior is controlled and directed, and if consciousness is in essence the determinant of the nature of our bodies, then someone else who's creating our consciousness is also creating our bodies and creating our minds and our behavior. And I can argue at this point that we are not yet a self-creating people. This is what you mean when you talk about self-determination. So we refer to consciousness then as a level of psychological and physiological arousal which facilitates the individual's awareness of his internal and external environment. In other words, to be conscious is to be conscious of. And consciousness means that we are conscious of our internal state. We are conscious of the fact that we are conscious. And we are conscious as well of our external environment. And the consciousness of our internal state and our external environment enables us, if we're in control of ourselves, to intentionally initiate and regulate our cognitive, that is our thinking behavior, and our behavioral activities towards the achievement of desired goals. That is, true consciousness, when it reaches a certain level of psychological and physiological arousal, permits us to intentionally or deliberately initiate and regulate our thinking patterns and our behavioral patterns toward achieving certain goals. Each level of consciousness makes possible and impossible certain types and forms of behavior in the achievement of some goals and not other goals. In other words, then, consciousness is a limiting case. It can extend our capacities to do things. At the same time, it limits our capacities. And we talked about it the last time, how sleep as a state of consciousness can permit us to restore our bodies, can permit us to dream, to consolidate the experiences we have undergone during the day. Wakefulness can permit us to do very active things, to coordinate our physical being, to achieve certain goals that we cannot achieve when we are asleep. Even within sleep, there are several stages of consciousness. We talk about dream consciousness, for instance. We talk about REM sleep, non-REM sleep, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4 sleep. We talk about various levels of consciousness in terms of brain wave activities, theta wave activity, beta wave, alpha wave activities, and other wave activities, and how those states of consciousness is represented by brain wave activities, by levels of sleep, are correlated with the capacity of the individual to achieve certain ends. The same thing is true then in terms of waking consciousness. There are many different levels of consciousness there. Each one of those levels can permit us to achieve certain things, but limit our capacity to achieve other things. So again, consciousness is the central instrument for solving our problems and for confronting the world. We have to keep that in mind when we talk about this concept. The nature of consciousness is emotional, intellectual, and social character is influenced to a marked degree by the social relations and experiences to which it has been exposed during its most impressionable developmental period. What are we saying here then? Consciousness, to a great extent, is socially manufactured. Now keep this in mind. If we're saying consciousness determines the state of our mind, determines the state of our body, if consciousness facilitates our behavior and at the same time inhibits our behavior, depending upon which state of consciousness we're in, if it is used to guide our behavior, then it becomes very important as to where that consciousness comes from and how it is originated. And we must keep in mind then that consciousness is not something that just is unique to us as an individual person, but it actually is generated by the kinds of social experiences that we have had. In other words, those people who have had control and influence in our lives in such a way that they have influenced the kinds of social interactions we've had, the kind of social conditions under which we've lived, the kind of educational experiences and socialization experiences we've undergone. Those people who have that kind of influence, to a great extent, have been those who've shaped our consciousness. That is why, again, we talk about African-centered education. Because we recognize that the type of education and the type of socialization which people undergo will to a great degree determine the type of consciousness they come to exhibit. And if we have the consciousness which will advance the interests of African people, we must undergo an African-centered experience. We must undergo African-centered social interaction. We must organize our environment in such a way that it produces an African-centered way of thinking. One of the other things I want to mention here then is not only individual consciousness, but we have what you might call group consciousness. If the sets of information, and information is a major part of consciousness, modes of information processing, we talked about that the last time we were here, that it is not enough just to have information, but we must possess the means of processing that information, subjecting the information we have to thought, to logic, to reasoning, to analysis, to abstraction, to conceptualization, to mobility. That is, we must move the information that we have about and coordinate that information in certain directions. It is not then the mere information that we have available to us that is important, but it is the means by which we process that information that is of equal importance. And we talked in our last lecture about how whites seek to falsify black consciousness by falsifying the information that's contained in our consciousness. Number one, by filling our consciousness with irrelevant information.
Talk about it.
By filling our consciousness with ignorance. Europeans may even fill our consciousness with relevant information. And they talk a lot of it out there. A lot of it. A lot of information out there. See, there are a lot of us who say we don't want to read anything by Europeans, written by Europeans. That's a mistake. That's a serious mistake. As I used to tell my class, as I opened up the general psychology class and other classes, every means, and as I got them to look at their textbook, I said, every means by which we are manipulated and controlled is contained right in this book. This white man has written it out for you, right here. Yes, all the time. I'm amazed at the amount of information these people lay out. But as I said, they have no fear of laying out the information because, see, they have come to understand the old adage. If you want to hide something from a Negro, what do? Put it in writing. Put it in writing. Yes. Because he gets sleepy when he reads. He gets headaches. He hates to use the dictionary. He hasn't developed his vocabulary. You know? Bored quickly by reading. Yes. Or he's interested in nothing that is rich. Or he's interested only in very narrowly focused knowledge. Knowledge that prepares him to be a servant only. Or prepares him to close his mind to reality. And therefore the white man enjoys freedom of the press. He can write blatantly and boldly in terms of the means by which he controls Negroes. He can project how he will control them. He discusses day in and day out the means by which Negroes will be manipulated without having any fear that he will be read by Negroes. Oh, yes. And then some of us, you see, we've been through so much, we have such an emotional problem until we still will not see what's in front of our eyes. I've often said, in order for us to be in the condition we're in, we have not to be able to see the obvious. That's a very, very important thing. We must be unable to see what is immediately in front of our faces. Yeah. In order for us to be in the condition we are in, we must be unable to use our common sense. In fact, it's interesting, as I said before, that whites will even call, and other whites will call a person like myself, Ark, and others, radical. And yet, when you listen to us carefully, we are very conservative. Yes, very commonsensical. There's little, if anything, radical about what we say. What is radical about telling people that they should feed themselves? What is radical about telling grown adult people that they should do for self? What is radical about telling people that they should run their own nation, own their own land, control their own internal markets? What is so radical about that? Yes, this is what we're trying to say. Other people take that for granted. Other people see that as just what? Common sense. Yes. But you see, what the whitey has done, and non-thinking Negroes have done, is that they have radicalized common sense. They have Negroes and made Negroes think that what is common sense is radical. And therefore, we reject common sense in rejecting the radical. And that is why we do not pursue things that anybody with common sense would do, not pursue. Because some have told us that that's revolutionary.
How about that?
And radical. And that is why we defeat ourselves and destroy ourselves. People rule over us. The people who rule over us read, develop vocabulary, manipulate the word. And yet, there are those among us who believe that we must reject this. It must be obvious that the capacity to manipulate the word is a power, is a source of power. Those of you who belong to the Christian religion know about that. First there was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And that God creates the world through what? Words and symbols. And first comes the symbol. First comes the concept as symbol. Then follows concrete reality. And this is the way man operates. This building was first conceived as a symbol, as an idea. It was first conceived in terms of a lot of words moving back and forth. A lot of words being written. A lot of symbols being drawn on paper. A lot of numbers being added and subtracted and multiplied and all of these kinds of things. A lot of abstract things being moved back and forth like money. Greenback, the symbols of wealth. Yes. Architects, drawing, and so forth. All what? Symbols, 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 words, concepts, ideas. Then it came into being as a result of the transformation of these symbols into concrete activities, ultimately leading then to a concrete construction. We therefore ignore the development of our capacity to manipulate symbols and words and to read. We suffer as a result of our avoidance of the development of those capacities. We have too many youngsters out here today who think, and particularly males, who think to read, to know words, to have knowledge is to be effeminate, is to be non-black, is to be nerdy. And yet it's the nerds of the world that are running it. Yeah. Yeah. It's those nerds right outside out here on this block that are intimidating us on these streets. Yeah. Those people that stayed there long enough at least to pass those exams and gain the physical force to intimidate us on these blocks. So group consciousness, we'll talk about it as the sets of information. It's the sets of information, modes of information processing. And we said again that whites seek to falsify black behavior, not only in terms of falsifying the information of which we operate, that's contained in our consciousness. They seek to impair the modes of information processing, the means by which we process the information that we have available to us. And we indicated too then that they sought to manipulate the values, and we're going to come back, that give consciousness direction. If the sets of information, modes of information processing, values and skills which define and direct an individual's consciousness are shared by or compatible with those of other individuals who mutually consider themselves to be the members of a distinct group, then it may be inferred that he, that individual, and the members of the group have generated and shared a group consciousness. In other words, the degree to which the sets of information and the way we process information and the values and the skills we have available to us are shared by others who belong to the same group we do, then, or to the degree that their skills and modes of processing information and information that they have available to them is compatible with our individual consciousness, then the group to which we belong shares then what we call a group consciousness. To the degree that such a group has been formed as the result of the fact that its members share a shared or common history, a shared or common ancestry or ethnicity, has been socialized according to the same or similar social practices as prescribed by the same or similar institutions, and has been trained and motivated to act and interact in ways which maintain and advances the interests of the group, it can be inferred that they participate in sharing a culture or a cultural consciousness. What are we saying here then? People come to share a group consciousness or a cultural consciousness. Now we're moving beyond the individual consciousness into a group consciousness. And how then do individuals come to share a group consciousness or a cultural consciousness? By sharing a common social history. We are here this evening as black folk, as African folk, because we share a common history as African folk and black folk. This is a part of our consciousness as a people. We share a common ancestry, our African ancestry. We have been socialized, unfortunately not by African institutions and people, but the same, we have been socialized according to some social practices, according and by means of some institutions, these Eurocentric schools and these other institutions. And we have been trained and motivated to act and interact in ways, unfortunately, not to maintain our African self, but to maintain the well-being of Europeans. Yet we still share a group consciousness and a cultural consciousness. And it is that consciousness that we're going to have to transform as people. A part of the transformation of this consciousness is the goal of an African-centered education, an African-centered socialization, where people come to know their history, come to identify with their ancestry, where African-based institutions become the means by which we are socialized, not Eurocentric institutions. And African-based and centered families become the means by which we are socialized. So that as a result of being socialized through African-based institutions, socialized by African-centered families, socialized around African-centered values and history, we will achieve a group consciousness which is African-centered. And once achieving that consciousness, we can act in the interest of African people. Group consciousness is an adaptational tool. Its operational presence facilitates the ability of otherwise exclusively self-interested individuals to cooperatively coordinate and organize their activities toward the achievement of the goals they find mutually desirable. What are we saying here then? Consciousness is a tool. It is a means by which we adapt to our environment and adapt our environment to ourselves. But more than that, group consciousness allows us to get people who would ordinarily be merely interested in themselves as individuals to cooperate one with the other, to coordinate their behavior, and to organize that behavior in cooperative ways, to achieve an end that moves beyond them as individuals, to achieve ends that are good for the group, achieve an end that they, as members of the group, find mutually to their benefit. Because we must recognize ultimately that the group is an extension of the individual. That the individual uses the group and is used by the group because the group can attain things that the individual by himself or herself cannot attain or achieve. 99% of the things that we probably are involved with today have been as a result of group activities. Whether it's the clothes we wear, the cars we drive, the food we eat, the transportation we use, you name it, one thing after the other. These things are the result of coordinated human behavior, of groups deciding, and individuals in groups deciding to coordinate their behavior, to synchronize their behavior, so that those things could be produced for the enjoyment of the group as a whole and for the enjoyment of individuals as a whole. Think of how much trouble we would have if we tried to produce everything as an individual that we enjoy and that we use. As a matter of fact, many of the things we enjoy and use would be impossible for us to achieve as an individual. That is why ultimately then we share a group consciousness, because many of the individual things we desire can only be achieved through group activity. So in a sense, the individual is born for the group and the group for the individual. One of the ways that the European seeks to disempower African people is to make each one of us think that we can exist as an island unto ourselves. That we are individuals, each doing his own thing. This is the reason why many of the achievements that other people have made through coalescing into a group have been made unavailable to us because we've been too busy being individuals. The only place where you have pure individuality, and even it's not pure, but where individuality is taken to an extreme, where each person in there is busy doing his own thing, is in an insane asylum. Where there's so much into being each one doing his own thing until they have to be controlled by outsiders. Which is pretty much our situation today. Because as I've told you many times before, in order for us to be in the condition we are in as African people, we have to be what? Out of our mind. We literally have to be crazy. Yes, into a deceptive state of consciousness which does not permit us to operate as a group and to coordinate our behavior as a group, and puts us at odds one with the other, and therefore making group achieved ends impossible. This is what group consciousness is about. This is what culture is about. Culture, too, is a tool, and you don't find any group that has undergone a shared history, shared experiences, and that shares a particular environment over time that does not develop a culture. Because culture is the means by which a group gains control over itself and over its members, and controls the behavior and consciousness of its members as a means of achieving a particular end, as a means of confronting the problems that are common to the group, as a means of manipulating nature and using nature to advance its own ends. Consciousness, therefore, whether individual consciousness or group consciousness, is therefore the premier instrument of social control. In other words, Consciousness is the means by which we control ourselves, our behavior. As individuals, and group consciousness and cultural consciousness is the means by which we control ourselves as members of groups. To a good extent, culture is the outward and visible and productive expression of a group's inner consciousness. In other words, we pretty much can look at the culture of the people and get a pretty good idea of the organization of their group consciousness and of their individual consciousness, of the content of their consciousness, of the informational processes, abilities of their consciousness, and the values which direct their consciousness. And we have to keep this kind of thing in mind because culture itself is our most practical tool as a group for dealing with the world. One of the things I want to speak to for a bit tonight, because consciousness and culture is so many-sided and multifaceted, is to speak to consciousness as ideology. Consciousness as a set of beliefs. When we talk about the contents of consciousness, we're not only talking about what we view as the facts, the knowledge that we have as such in our consciousness, in our mind, in our brain, that are available to us for use. We also must recognize that the contents of consciousness include our beliefs, the myths that we have in our minds, our beliefs about ourselves and about the world. This is a very, very important part of consciousness because we act on our beliefs, whether those beliefs are based in fact or not. We act on mythology, whether that mythology is based on fact or not. Thus, though consciousness is a product of actual experience, as we said earlier, and of social experience, it is essentially ideological since it is shaped and motivated and directed on the basis of shared beliefs, customs, expectations, myths, and values. In other words, consciousness not only operates in terms of our concrete knowledge, in terms of information that we have available to us, in terms of processing that knowledge and information, but in terms of what we believe, in terms of customs, in terms of what we expect of ourselves and expect the future to bring, in terms of myths and values. It's very important that we focus on this concept of culture as ideology, consciousness as ideology, as belief. Remember again, we said what? We use consciousness and culture to direct our behavior, to deal with the world. Remember as well that consciousness, because it directs our behavior, and through our behavior we have an effect on the world. Consciousness then is a power because it enables us to influence the world, to influence us. It enables us to determine how the world is going to influence us and to determine the effect that others will have on us. Therefore, consciousness is a power. It is a means and an instrument by which we manipulate the world. We manipulate the outer world and others in that world, as well as we manipulate our inner world and ourselves. It's important that we keep in mind. And yet, that consciousness that's doing all these things is based on, to a good extent, our beliefs, our ideas, our myths. It's very important that we keep that in mind because we have to ask the question, what are the sources of our beliefs, of the myths that we use to create our consciousness? One of the sources are our expectations and our values. Are they the sources from African history? Are they beliefs developed based on reality? Are they beliefs based on racist ideologies? racist propaganda, having been exposed to racist institutions, racist living conditions, and other conditions. Since culture is to a great extent ideological, and consciousness is ideological, and since culture and consciousness are powers, this implies then that those who control our consciousness and those who control our culture use the power of our consciousness and culture to advance their own ends. This is why we call Eurocentric culture a vampiristic culture, a culture of vampires, one that sucks the blood, that uses the power of potential African consciousness and potential African culture as a means for furthering its own ends. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, it is this artificially created set of beliefs which involves this artificially created consciousness and culture that we call black consciousness and black culture, which provides the power for European domination. As I've said time and time again, the European cannot be what he is unless what? We are what we are. While we emphasize the degree to which we are the Frankenstein people of Europeans, we must also recognize that we created these people as well. And we continue to create them and sustain them to the degree that we let them create our culture and create our consciousness as a people. If culture then is ideological in its fundamental sense, it means, as was argued by Wartburg in his book, The Forms of Power, which I advise people to read, never mind that the man is a Jew, The Forms of Power, Thomas Wartburg, because as I told you earlier, these people lay out in that text exactly how they control it and manipulate it. They lay out the prescription by means of which we can be controlled as African people. There's a book that I recommend, a book written again, I guess, by a Jewish person who's done business, by the name of Shapiro, called The Neurotic Personality, I believe, maybe called another name. And I recommend it when students come to me for mentoring, one of the first books I recommend, because it talks about neurotic style. That's what it's called, neurotic style, not neurotic, by Shapiro. Classic book, because it defines the cognitive, the thinking style of different neurotic orientations. You know, and it's a classic in that sense. Just how do obsessive-compulsive people think and see the world. How do paranoid people think and deal with the world? What's their style of thought? There's a style that's called the hysterical personality. And this is not a personality necessarily that's a hilarious personality, but it's a personality that is highly impressionable, highly influenceable, if we could say that word. It's a personality often that converts its psychological problems into physical problems and into physical handicaps and into psychosomatic disorders. It is generally a highly emotional personality, defined more by its emotionality than by its intellectuality. It's defined more in terms of its fuzziness, of its willingness to be approximate rather than exact. Mind you, somebody? Of its responsivity to superficial impressions rather than looking beyond the surface. It is a personality that has a messianic complex that guides it, that some kind of Moses, some kind of Jesus, or some kind of knight in white armor, whatever you call it, is going to come and rescue it from this situation. It's one of those personalities that believe that there's a rocket ship up there somewhere that's going to come down and save black folks. Oh, yes. Yeah. All the ships and auto ships and all other kind of ships. Is that personality that even said Jesus is black? Maybe. That gives me a problem. Jesus is black, and we catch the hell we'll catch it. I wonder what kind of black man he is. Acts more like a white man to me. But that's another story. But there's that hysterical personality, and he goes on and he describes his personality in great detail. But the thing that he says at the center of that personality is that this is a personality that is based on no sense of history, of long history and of enduring history. You see what I'm saying? That a hallmark of this hysterical personality, this emotionally laden out personality, this personality that reacts to superficiality, this personality that is focused on the immediate, in the immediate present, this personality that lives in wishful thinking, is that it is characterized by the fact that it is not based on a long and enduring history and sense of history, and that it is not guided by a long and abiding sense of the future and where it wants to go. That means then that this kind of personality finds little reason to resist immediate distractions. Because, in a sense, if it is not guided by deep and abiding expectations and purposes, it has no reason not to enjoy the immediate. It has no reason not to be distracted by the immediate. It is a personality where impulses are immediately acted upon without thinking. But you can see, if you have no long-term goals, if you have no deeply held values that you want to realize in the distant future, there is no reason to resist immediate emotion or immediate impulses. There's no reason to hold back and suppress those impulses in the interest of achieving future goals. If you don't have future goals, why hold back? But if you have deep future goals, then you bring judgment to apply. And you say, should I indulge this impulse? Should I indulge this desire? Because if indulging it would mean that I will be diverted from a very valuable goal, I'll be unable to reach a deeply held goal that rests in the future, then I must resist this emotion. I must transform its energy in such a way that it can lead to my achieving the goal that I have in mind. The college student who is tempted, or the high school student, or any student who's tempted by the party, who's tempted to hide out, or to hang out, must look at that temptation and look at it and measure it against long-term goals, long-term wishes and purposes, and see in what way it either contributes or destroys his effort to achieve those goals. And once making that judgment, applies this capacity to repress the impulse and to sit at the desk, to sit at the book, and to continue to read and to study and to continue to develop those skills and other means necessary to achieve long-term goals. Now, when Shapiro talks about that, you can read this as a characteristic of the hysterical person, of this neurotic style, or you can read it as a prescription for creating hysterical people. You see? In other words, you can say, if you are a master and you wish to create a people who are concerned only with the immediate, who are easily distractible, who have problems concentrating, who have poor memory, who respond to the colorful, who do not see beyond the surface, who have problems of controlling their impulses, who are subject to all kinds of addictions and so forth. I tell you what you do. Number one, you rob them of any sense of enduring what? History. And a sense of continuity and a sense of connectedness with the past. You do that first. And then you rob them of a set of values to which they're highly committed, a set of purposes to which they intend to fulfill. You rob them of the desire to be in control of their future and to create the kind of future they want instead of depending upon someone else to create the future that they must live in. You rob them of these two things and you will create this kind of mentality. When you read the psychology text, you can read them then in terms of the symptoms of people who have problems, or you can read them in terms of how you create people so that they can what? Have problems. You see, each time you read about a neurotic style or some kind of neurosis, they go into what? Early family experience, don't they? Mother-child relationships, things of this nature. The kind of social environment that seems to have combined to have created this kind of style. Just don't read this then this way. Read it then in the way that says there are people who have destabilized families in such a way. They have created environments in such a way. They have generated then certain ideas and things in such a way that they tend to create a large number of people with particular types of social and mental style within a particular group. Am I getting to you here? You must understand. See, this is the reason why it's not the material that the Europeans put before you, it's the approach to the material that is important. They will reveal to you things that they never intended to reveal. The idea is to subvert their intentions to your own intentions. And you can subvert any Eurocentric information. I don't care whether they meant to lie or not to lie, or they tell it facts or not facts. You can subvert any of them if you have an African-centered perspective. Because it is that perspective which transforms any reality into one that works for African people. Even if it's Eurocentric lies, it still works. To understand this then. So if culture is ideological, so he says here, that means then that people can be ruled in terms of their ideas. As Weisberg goes on to say, and also another book you can read in this regard, Nietzsche, The Genealogy of Morals. There is an inherent tendency for the dominant to secure their position of dominance by developing misunderstandings among the dominated concerning reality and what is happening to them. One group's domination of another can come about simply through its ability to get the members of the other group to conceive of themselves or the world in a particular way. In other words, if consciousness and culture are ideological, then we can grab control of other people's consciousness and of their culture through manipulating their beliefs and manipulating their ideas. In some, it is possible for one group to dominate another group simply by the means of ideas, by getting that group to think about themselves and the world in a manner that allows them to be subjugated In other words, ladies and gentlemen, if we are a subjugated people, we in part have cooperated with our subjugation. Particularly when we have not examined the ideas upon which we operate. We have not reassessed and maybe even exercised from our minds and our bodies ideas that we use to guide our behavior. If the ideas that are at center of our consciousness and of our culture are ideals placed there by Europeans, then it is through these ideas that the Europeans dominate us. And it is through these ideas that we mistakenly call our own, that we collude in our subjugation. I want to emphasize that, even though it may appear unfair to some people, and it may appear that I'm placing a lot of the blame on us, and to a degree I am, because if we are to change these circumstances, it is going to be through our transformation as people that they're changed. We cannot depend upon the change of other people. And we must look then at the degree to which we are part of our own problem. And how then, by changing the part over which we can gain control, we can change the nature of the problem and perhaps even resolve it. A similar idea can be stated in reference to values. Valuation is a means by which a social group can use to gain, is a means that a social group can use to gain power over another group, even when that latter group seems to be in position to dominate the former. In other words, the values that we use can be the tools of another group by means of which that other group has gained control over us, even when we are in a position to overthrow that other group. This situation that we have right out here on this street is a situation that we can come to dominate. We do not have to be dominated out here economically the way we are being dominated. As I will demonstrate later on, we are being dominated mainly through the ideas that we've permitted to inhabit our consciousness as a people. Not by those cops on the block per se, not by those alien vendors in the shops, but by the very values we have inculcated in ourselves as people, or we've permitted other people to inculcate in us. One group of human beings can use the minds of a group of other human beings as the chains of their own servitude. But I tell you that in order for us to be in the condition we are in as African people, we would have to be in a state of deception. We would have to be in that state that's similar to the one I talked about that says, if the midget controls the giant, then the giant must see the midget as a giant and himself as a what? As a midget. Black people are in the condition we are in today because our consciousness has been reversed. And because the values we pursue reverse our consciousness and our culture. We are then enchained by the ideas that we call our own. And we are enchained by our own mind more than we are enchained by Europeans. Because people's beliefs have a constitutive effect on what they do and allowed to be done, domination can be constituted within the realm of belief alone. Because, in a sense, what we are, and we are what we are to a significant extent because of what we believe. That's what we mean when we say constituted. We then can be dominated by our beliefs alone. If we do things based on our beliefs, And we allow things to be done based on our beliefs. Then domination, which determines what we do and what we allow to be done, can be achieved over us based on beliefs alone. Beliefs and values. Now let's get more to the concrete aspect of what I talked about here. To a good extent, the situation where we find black vendors on the streets of the main commercial areas of their community is a result of an ideology, of an economic ideology that we have. I said before that we should, as an African people, think of ourselves in terms of a nation. We should use the nation as the unit of analysis, not our individual selves, not even our families, but ourselves as a nation. Yes. We should see ourselves in America as a nation within a nation. And it's very important that we do that because it will permit us to understand problems in ways that we could never understand them if we looked at ourselves as individuals or merely as members of families. And of course, this is what the other people like to lay on us. They love to talk about us in terms of individuals and family background, but not in terms of an African nation in America. There are good reasons for that. You can see many things if you use the nation concept that you cannot see from an individual point of view. You can also see solutions to problems that you cannot arrive at if you look at them in individualistic and familialistic terms. One of the things that we recognize when we see ourselves as an African nation is, like any other nation, we have a general economic ideology, a set of beliefs about economics that's part of our problem. What is that ideology? It is the ideology of the free market. You know, people talk about that all the time, right? Free market, open market. We are the only nation in America, and I refer to other nations, the white nation, the Korean nation, the Arab nation, the Hispanic nation. We're the only nation on this continent, and really in the world, that actually believes sincerely in free markets and open markets. Oh yeah, you heard whites talk about open markets and free markets. They talk about it, but they don't believe it. They use that to manipulate the behavior of other people. The United States of America maintained a closed economic market from its inception until 1915, until the very First World War. It protected that market against the free entry of all other nations, including Mother Britain. It did not even permit the English, who to a great extent, along with other Europeans, financed its development. That is, while it used the merchants of Amsterdam and the merchants of France, the merchants of Europe and England to finance its economic growth, it did not permit them a free ride and free trade within the American market. It protected those markets. It heavily taxed any outside nation that sought to trade with it as a means of protecting its own developing industries, so that its own industries could develop without the competition of mature industries based in other nations and places. It did. England itself did not even have a free market. It destroyed the armada of Spain, of Portugal, and of France to keep them from competing with itself. And yet you claim free market is some American idea or European idea. You're going to find, ladies and gentlemen, that one of the things capitalists like to meet is competition. They talk about it, but they try like hell to do what? Destroy it. That's right. The whole idea of the major capitalists is not to maintain competition, but to what? Destroy it and remove it. And yet they'll talk about free competition, free and open competition. And the very ones talking about it are creating monopoly, cartel, corner to destroy competition. The major thing a capitalist wants is an organized market and a predictable market. And we don't have time to go into, this is a fascinating history. When you read, say, the robber barons, or you read the early history of J.P. Morgan, Carnegie, read those histories. These are people, by the way, that Booker Washington was very familiar with. Carnegie, he knew personally. Carnegie even financed some of his stuff. Of John D. Rockefeller. I think in part, you see, when we read the history of our people, we should also read the context of the general American history in which they existed. I believe to a degree it was due to the fact that Booker T. Washington was in direct contact with people like Andrew Carnegie, with the Morgans, or with these major capitalists, that he recognized that power rested in the economic control of production. In what? The ownership of property. In the control of capital. Not in voting, as W. Du Bois was so deceived in thinking. Yes, because he recognized, as he observed the behavior of Carnegie's and Rockefellers and Morgans and Goulds and the other ones that were out there, that they were the ones actually running the United States and determining its future. Not the voters, not the congressmen. They were bribing the congressmen. They were bribing the legislatures. They were determining the outcome of elections. They were determining the nature of the U.S. government and its relationship. They had the United States government give them something like 150 million acres literally free of charge. And they used the taxes of the people to finance their own development and for their own private benefit. And so it didn't matter how the people voted. It didn't matter that they voted in the Congress, that they voted in the Senate, that they voted in the president. In the end, these people essentially were the water boys of those who owned the means of production and owned property in the world. And ultimately, it is those who own property who will control the lives of the populace, no matter how much they vote. And I think Booker Washington, interacting with these men to a greater degree than W. Du Bois, was able to understand that the foundations of power in America was the ownership of property, and the ownership of means of production, and the ownership of real skills, you see, and the ownership of human capital and resources, and the excluding of certain other groups from the ownership of that property, and the ownership of certain skills and resources. This is the basis of power, because power is never equally shared in any society. Power is unequally shared. And those who have the most of it are those who are in control of the major resources of the society, not those who merely have a vote in their hands. You see? And yet we have that kind of game going on out here today. These jokers you're voting for have already been bought by the capital. Yes. Yes. And I'll tell you later, even when you vote them in to office, their legislation, their governance will be dictated by the structure of finance capital and the corporate system. Yes. You see how afraid they are to raise taxes? You see how everybody is running to lower taxes, even though they're chopping what? Hospitals, schools, destroying people's jobs, and the country is regressing in terms of its infrastructure and so forth. And yet, people, almost everyone who's running for office is saying what? Lower taxes. We're going to cut taxes. Then by what means do you finance important social institutions if the people do not finance them through their tax dollars and so forth? Well, it appears that a decision has been made, hasn't it? That those institutions, particularly those that serve African people, will be what? Destroyed and cut back. Why? Because black people are going out there to vote tomorrow? No. Because the global capitalists, the transnational companies in this country have told these governments that they will not locate jobs, they will not locate factories, they will not locate other institutions in their state and in their region if they maintain their taxes at a particular level. In fact, they call it creating a business climate. You hear that all the time, don't you? You ever wonder what that meant? To create the appropriate business climate? That means a business that does not want to pay taxes. That means a business that wants a tax break, and we're going to talk about these things. New York City is broke to a good degree because it has a lot of major capital resources in here that are not paying taxes at all. Many hotels and many other capital institutions here have received tax holidays, some for 10, some for 15, some for 20 years. These capitalists now make these states and cities and locales compete against one another to get their factories. And they compete against one another by reducing to its lowest degree the amount of taxes that that corporation has to pay. And often they set it up in such a way that the corporation has to pay no tax. I've talked to you about the Mercedes-Benz plant in Alabama, where the state gave it a tax credit of $300 million. Where the city in which it was located contributed $30 million to purchasing the land upon which that factory would be set. And the state kicked in another $5 million to grade the land. And with this $300 million tax break, you see, the Mercedes-Benz built a $300 million factory, which meant what? That Mercedes-Benz didn't have to pay a thing. And it meant then that the people of Alabama bought 15,000 jobs very expensively. It literally meant then that Mercedes-Benz was paid, used the public money to further its own private ends. It means that the services, the social services, and the other services that must be supplied by the state will continue to be paid by the taxpayer. Another thing that these businesses demand, if you're going to create an appropriate business climate, is to reduce taxes that go to welfare, social services, and other areas they deem as non-productive areas. They see these areas as not generative of profit and so forth, and therefore they demand that their taxes not be used, if they pay them, to support people who are in need of it through the social service system. And this is what you see happening in this state. This is what you see happening all over the country. The capitalists are saying, if you're going to have us in, then you must do this. So even after the people vote them in, the legislature, because it's hamstrung by these capitalists, are unable to protect the people's interests. This is the kind of game that goes on there. And others will say, if you keep raising taxes, or if you keep supporting these people in these inner city schools, if you keep supporting these people through these inner city hospitals, if you keep supporting these people through welfare payments and other kinds of payments, we will move our factories out. And the legislators then, because they don't want to be accused of losing jobs. So you hear many of these guys say, so-and-so lost 10,000 jobs. These are saying, we are going to do what's necessary to keep the jobs here. And therefore, if to keep the jobs here, we have to shut down schools and hospitals and so forth and so on. This is what we will do. And this is going to be voted in by your legislators and by your governors and so forth, regardless of the fact of how you vote for them. Because the capitalists have a stronger hand over them than do the voters. You got to learn what this is about. So we didn't believe in free markets. What do I mean by free markets? This situation out here on 125th Street is one where we believe Koreans and Arabs and whites and every other person but white folks are free to move in and earn money any way they feel like earning. And not only can they earn that money out there, they are free to take it out of the neighborhood and out of the community without paying 1 ounce of tax, without making one contribution to its social institution, without hiring any significant number, if any, of its members, without supporting any of its cultural and other institutions and establishments. They are free to come in and earn the wealth and tuck that wealth right out. Because they are what? Americans, just like we are. And we live in a multicultural society. And they have as much right as we do to be on the street. That's why we have it. But nations don't operate that way. Nations do not see alien groups as having as much right to take advantage of their wealth as they do themselves. Nations don't see aliens and alien nations as having more right to carry the wealth out of the nation than the nation has itself to benefit from its wealth. No nations believe that are truly of themselves. The struggle you have now going on between the only way the United States pushed free markets, which it talked about so much, is because the United States at that time was the one that had most of the money and most of the wealth. And therefore, by convincing other people to believe in free markets, by convincing other people that they should not protect their markets, that they should not protect their property, that they should not protect their land, that they should not protect their wealth, that they should leave their wealth exposed to United States investments. The United States, because of the wealth advantage it had, preached free markets, not because it believed in democracy, because it believed in individual freedom and so forth. We know better, but because when it got people to believe in that ideology, those people would open their markets to this country, and the United States capitalists could enter into their markets and come to and own every valuable piece of property and wealth that belonged to that nation, and could suck that wealth out of that nation and leave its people impoverished, even though they felt righteous, because they believed in free market. You have not seen any nation on this earth consume itself into power, gain power by what? Spending only. You will never see a nation that is a nation of consumers ever be a free nation and a powerful nation in this world. You will only see nations who've made it in this world economically, that are nations that are what? Productive, and have control over the means of production, which means property, resources, both human and non-human resources, and materials. There is no way you're going to exercise real power in this nation and in this world if you believe that your wealth and possibilities can be freely given without any kind of stipulation to any other group of people. I don't care how righteous it sounds. It's not going to happen. And yet we have that kind of ideology out here. And that is the reason we suffer the way we do. We have the ideology of individualism. Each of us doing his own thing. Yet the building of these stores, the occupying of these stores by other groups is done by a coordinated system of activities. It's done on the basis of institutions and group behavior, not just mere individuals pursuing their own self-interest, but of individuals who have coalesced and combined their resources so that this could happen. We are in the condition we're in, and the situation is the way it is out there, because our consciousness is a reactionary consciousness. It is more concerned with defending our injured ego than with advancing our interests. It is a consumerist consciousness that is absorbed by consumption and buying and eating more than it is with producing. It sees the end of life as continuous consumption. It sees the very meaning of life as contained in consuming and buying, not in owning and controlling. We don't care who sells us just as long as we can buy. Just as long as you get out of the way and let me get to the white man and give him my money. We're only concerned with how we can consume, not how we can produce. And because we have that as our central concern, we are under the control of other people. Our values are values such that we value being smiled at by Koreans more than owning the businesses that they have and feeding our children through their profits. We value their superficial friendship more than we value transferring the wealth that we have in our pockets to our children and creating jobs for ourselves and for our families. We value being accepted by whites, which we'll never get, more than we value self-acceptance. We value jobs and working for white folks and value being identified and gaining our status based on the white plantation we work on than the one we own and control ourselves. When you have then a people caught up with the ideology of free market, individualism, consumerism, the desire to be accepted and loved by their masters, a desire to work for rather than to employ and create employment, you have the kind of situation you got right out there on 125th Street, on all of the 125th streets across America, on all of the 125th streets across the Caribbean, across the whole African diaspora, including Mother Africa itself. Yeah. If you go to Kenya, you'll see the African vendors on the outside, on the sidewalk, and the East Indians and Arabs on the inside, in the shops. If you go to Ivory Coast, you'll see the French people in the boutiques and on the inside, and the Africans West on the outside. You go to Caribbean, you go to any place here, you see the same kind of game. Why? Because we are imbued with the same kind of false values and the same kind of false beliefs and the same kind of false orientation toward consumption rather than ownership. We believe that our communities should be free markets when no other community permits such a market to occur within themselves. As I've told you before, the reason why we are in the condition we're in is because we look at ourselves as a nation. We see that we've let the Korean nations and the other nations invade our internal markets, take the money and the wealth out of those internal markets back to their own neighborhoods and communities and nations. On top of that, we have seen that they block us from access to their market, and therefore we are in a double bind. We are blocked from access to the markets of aliens because they do not let people freely walk into those markets, and we are blocked from access to our own internal markets, and therefore we must operate in the cracks between the two. And those groups then make it illegal for such an operation to occur, and therefore the black economy ceases to exist. And this is based on our belief, not even on their orientation, but our belief. Because if we didn't believe in these free markets, we would not support these people without spending. And they are only here because we spend money with them here and we keep them here. And we spend money with them because we have false ideologies and false beliefs as a people. We have then to examine ourselves. Let's look more closely at what is going on. And this is the peril. And this is the peril of so-called third world nations and African nations who have been inculcated with Eurocentric values that they think are righteous, values that they think are good. They fail to ask good for whom and good for what. They are just told they are good. You see, it's good not to spend your money relative to somebody's race. It's bad to look at a person's race and make a decision as to whether you're going to spend or not spend. Oh, that's right. I want to be good and I want to be righteous. It's good just to open your market and let anybody come into the market and take advantage of the market who wants to come in. So we want to be good, and therefore we cannot get access to our own market. Other people grow wealthy. Other people then create a trade imbalance. They take our wealth and stack it up in their own nations, and they use that stacked up wealth that they've gotten from our communities and our nation as the basis for their power in the world, and as the means by which they will dominate us and control our circumstances. They will take the power that they gain from owning our property and owning our wealth to maintain us independency, since we are the propertyless, and we must earn our very subsistence based on the rules and regulations generated by those who own property. And it's property that we have given to them and permitted them to have. You cannot run a nation if its wealth is being suctioned off. I talked to you earlier about the opium wars, of how China, how the British got a taste for tea, but China was the only place that was growing the tea. The British didn't have anything the Chinese wanted. It's interesting, you see how taste controls the world. And when you let other people create your taste, they also create handles, the means by which they're going to manipulate you. The whole of the empire of drug addiction and drug dealing is based on what? Taste and desire. And the manipulation of people's taste and desire. The British are addicted to tea. They became addicted to tea. I've told you before, it was their addiction to sugar that's to a great extent the reason why blacks were sprinkled throughout the Caribbean and the Americas. To feed the British sweet tooth, we were made to cut the cane and to make molasses and rum. So you can't take taste lightly, you see, because it is man's desires and taste that motivates him to create a world and transform the world in a way that his tastes and desires are fulfilled. So then, that is why, again, you cannot let another people generate your desires and produce your desires and produce your taste. Because when they do, when they are in control of producing for those desires and producing for those tastes, they are going to manipulate their behavior based on the taste and desires that they have created. And this is what has happened to us as a people. We have lost our African taste. We have lost the taste for things that we can produce for ourselves. We hunger most deeply for things that are produced by other people. And the other people keep producing taste and desires in us all the time. Through TV, through radio, through newspapers, through ads. Every conceivable means of communication is used to create the taste and produce taste in black people. Taste and desires that we think represent our own individual personality. And they make sure that the taste and desires they create are the taste and desires they alone have the means by which they can produce for them and satisfy them. Yes. And this is what happened when the British became addicted to the tea. You see, the Chinese had the tea, and the Chinese then were in a position relative to the British added to put conditions on their getting the tea. They said, what? You want this tea? you got to pay in silver and gold. And the British silver and gold just flowed right out of England by the ton. And it flowed out so much that it began to threaten the stability of the English government and of English society. Because you need money and wealth to run a society, not just value. I get so sick of these people like, well, family value. You can't be the value. Value doesn't clothe you, shelter you, okay? But they want Negroes to believe in spookism, you know, that it's value, oh, you gotta have a value, not money, not property, not human resources, not skills, but value. And then your only problem is a result of the fact that you don't have value. You're missing family value. That's why you are suffering. Is that right? Yeah. It's amazing. You got some Negroes who go along with that business. Give the Negroes the values and give the white man the money. Give the white man the military power. Give him the intellectual power. Give him the skills. Give him all these other things, but give Negroes family value. So you got jokers talking about nothing but what? Value. It's an amazing situation. And therefore, values must be supported. Values must be reinforced. People must be rewarded for holding certain values. It is not enough just to teach values and have people then to get into eternal trouble as a result of having those values. Having people still go hungry despite the fact that they have the values you say were so rightful for them. Having people go jobless, having people be sick, yet they got the values. Some people have sense enough to question those values. And say, the hell with these values, they're not producing anything for me. And that's why ultimately then values are rejected. It is not enough for you to teach your children the right kind of values. You must arrange it such that when they pursue those values are rewarding to them. Those values are materially supported and reinforced. But to teach them values in such a way where they continue to suffer, they continue to be dominated and controlled, where they continue to be in pain and they continue to be sick, means ultimately that they are going to reject those values. And they're going to reject the people who taught them to them. And they're going to view the people who teach those values as their enemies. And produce and see those values as a concave. You wonder why they reject you. They wonder why they reject you when you try to teach them the righteous way. It's because you have no way to back those rules up and to back those values up and to make those values pay. You need to teach more than values. You need to arrange your life in such a way that those values have valuable outcomes and real outcomes for people. And so the British values the teach. And the Chinese then say you got to pay in gold. And the British lost their gold and silver. They realized if they didn't watch out, the government would not be able to finance itself. And the government would not be able to finance the social system. And the social system would become disorganized. And you would have social disorganization and social breakdown. The government would lose its authority. And it would not be able to generate jobs and generate wealth and therefore support its families and support its economic infrastructure. And it's not supporting its families would become disorganized and destabilized. Mothers and fathers would lose authority within the family, and the children would gain a type of self-control that would be detrimental to them. The British recognized that in terms of what was going on. And they said that we have a problem here. We must find some way of balancing this trade, of getting an exchange between China and Britain in such a way that we will be enriched through our trade with China. But since the British didn't have anything the Chinese want, what did the British do? They addicted the Chinese to what? To opium. They had control over the opium fields of India and Burma. And they shipped the opium to China against the laws of China, against the attempts of the Chinese government to interdict this opium. It is the sale of opium that is the financial foundation of the English government. The crown of the queen today, as Buckingham Palace today, is built upon the drug trade. And as much of the economy of the United States is built on the drug trade today. The selling of opium and the control of opium became a British governmental monopoly. And the foundation of English power and colonial power in Hong Kong and in China and in other parts of the world was based on the selling of opium and the selling of drugs. Some of the most honored of British companies and British powerful capitalistic formation was based almost exclusively on the selling of drugs and opium. The government knew, the British government was so dependent upon the selling of drugs and opium and recognized the degree to which it contributed to its power and to its stability, until when the Chinese showed that they meant business, and that in terms of keeping the opium out, the government itself went to war in 2 opium wars to make sure that the Chinese market remained what? Open. Free. To British enterprise. And the Chinese government went to war. For what reason? Because once its population, a large part of its population, became addicted to opium, the British made a similar demand, didn't they? So you got to pay in what? Silver and gold. And now the Chinese silver and gold did what? Flowed in the other direction. And now the Chinese government saw itself in danger. It saw its country beginning to collapse. It not only was losing money and wealth and the means to finance itself and to generate wealth and to advance its economic interests, it also now had a major social problem, drug addiction. And it moved in to block the selling of drugs, and the British moved in to destroy that capacity to do so. And Hong Kong today is one of the major means by which, one of the things that the British acquired as a result of the Opium Wars. What are we saying here then, ladies and gentlemen? We are saying here then that you cannot permit your wealth to flow out of your community and have your community remain stable. You cannot permit your wealth to flow out of your community and have your families remain stable. You cannot permit your wealth to be sucked out of your community and advance your community's economic interests and develop its economic infrastructure and create jobs so for its members and to support the stability of its family, to appropriately educate its children, to see to the ills of those who are sick, and to advance interest. You can't do it. It's no way possible that it can happen. And yet we're letting our wealth flow out. This is the reason why, then, you have so much crime and violence within our midst, not only in this country, in America, but in the Caribbean as well, in Africa as well, and in other places where black people are domiciled and are resident, for essentially the same reason. Because African people not perceiving themselves as nations and not acting in terms of their national interests are permitting other people to seize their wealth and to take their wealth. You do not see crime and criminality to such a degree we see it, where you do not see an immense concentration of poverty. Even within the black community, we pointed out, there are 7 communities or neighborhoods within New York State that generate 75% of the inmates in the state prisons. But there are many more than 7 black what? Neighborhoods in the state. And yet, when you look at those neighborhoods, you will see it is in those neighborhoods that the income levels are low, that the human skills levels are low, that the educational skills and other skills are low. And most of all, blacks relative to whites, you will see crime and violence occurring to its highest degree, where those people do not have control of their internal market and control of their wealth and control of some type of human capital that they can use as a source of wealth and power. We'll hurry on here. But I just want to look at one thing. We have a project here I want to talk about. Some of you are familiar with the Pathmark project down the street, right? East there, 125th and near 3rd Avenue, I think. Many blacks see that as some kind of advancement for the black community. How is it sold? In terms of convenience and low price. The same way we unemploy and justify the unemployment of these vendors out here. We have not removed not only just a so-called 1,000 vendors, we've destroyed the life not just of 1,000 people. I tell people, you know, when people say GM or some other company has cut 10,000 jobs, you should multiply that by 5. Right. That means that there may be 4 or 5 or 6 people dependent on those jobs. And so instead of 10,000 lives being disrupted, 30, 40, 50, 60,000 lives are being disrupted. Instead of then 1,000 lives being disrupted out here, there will perhaps 3, 4, 5,000 lives being disrupted. The lives of whole families are disrupted, not just the individual vendors that you saw out there on the block, but those who depended upon their earnings as a means of feeding themselves and sheltering themselves and educating themselves and protecting themselves against illnesses and other means. It was not a mere movement of vendors who happened to be selling T-shirts. It was a destruction and a destabilization of thousands of people's lives. And yet we have some jokers who justify this in terms of the convenience of getting into Woolworths. I don't have to walk around the vendors now. I can just walk right into Woolworths and get a white man on my mind. Yeah. It's argued in terms of what? Convenience. Convenience. Yes. Convenience. Oh, I hate to walk around all those vendors. Oh, the garbage they leave. Oh, man. Yeah. What a situation here. But this comes out of this kind of false ideology. A false belief that we have here as a people. This is going to permit other people to suck the wealth of the community. We are more concerned as to whether there's garbage left on the street or whether we have to walk around a table than we are with whether the wealth of the community would be used to maintain the community itself. You got to be backwards. Whether the wealth of the community will be used to employ people in the community. Whether the wealth of the community will be used to feed and shelter and clothe the people of the community. We are more concerned as to whether we have to walk through some trash or we have to walk around and send the table. What kind of false consciousness must we possess in order to arrive at this state? Now we have some people proposing to build a pathmark down the street. And they propose to say that this is an advancement for black people. Study that proposal very closely, ladies and gentlemen. This is a part of a major move on the part of a company or a non-profit corporation called LISC, called Local Initiative Support Corporation, in partnership with some local community groups and churches. Oh yeah, because the game is the same all over. Yes. And some preachers. And some other community groups along with the politicians. Yeah. Now what is this initiative? Now this initiative is going to enter into so-called partnership with these community groups to build this big supermarket and to have some attached stores and so forth. Let us say a type of mall there. Now you should get very suspicious of a situation like that. Why? First of all, you see, Negroes are deceived because LISC, this Local Initiative Support Corporation, is called a non-profit corporation. And we think when we hear the word non-profit, that means that it is charitable. Yes, that it's charity. And that way, I mean, we really let it have its way there. Yeah, you know, we just say, hey, man, let's go. You know, these people are being good for us. But let me tell you something about foundations, the Ford Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation. Oh yeah, Rockefeller, all of these big foundations that we hear about, all of these non-profit agencies. Just because things are non-profit foundations does not mean that that the foundation is not in the profit-making business. To a good extent, these non-profit foundations are the front men or the advanced men for their profit-making brothers. They go in and prepare the territory and prepare the ground so that their profit-making brothers can come in and take the wealth of a community. You talk about, Lyft came into business with a grant from the Ford Foundation. It raised $648 million to build low-income housing. A very charitable thing, isn't it? Right? Low-cost, non-profit housing. However, stop and think. The architect who drew the plan for the house did not do it as a what? An act of charity. He or she what? Profited it from drawing those plans. The construction company, which was not black, and many of the people who work for it, which generally are not what? Black, made a what? Profit from making non-profit housing, from making low-income housing. The furniture and other retailers who sold the furniture, who sold the other items that will go into this low-income housing, did not do it for charity. They did it for what? Profit. The plumbers and the carpenters and the electricians and all of the people and people who consult and service and take advantage of a situation. That's why we have to have our own so-called foundation and our own charity organization. So when we decide to build low-income housing or we decide to build certain non-profit institutions, those who do make a living and profit from it will be our own. We cannot permit then other groups who in the guise of being non-profit organizations create a means by which the community will be impoverished all the more. And now this organization, and look at the people then, and one may be very suspicious of this project. As I first read, oh goodness, they're going to put in these things here, this is not a profit organization. But then a line caught my attention. There are investors in this project. And who are the investors? Prudential, GE Capital, yes, yes, Bank of America, yes, you mentioned Dreyfus, and the venerable J.P. Morgan. All right. So you know this is not a non-profit game. If these guys are investing in this project, they're investing in it to make money. And as I read further and I researched further, I recognized that Lyft had promised them a minimum of 10% per annum over a 10-year period on their investment. And I wondered then, where were the investors in the black community? And in what way will this community itself be able to invest in this project and gain from investing in it? I did not see it there. Where is it? In what way? I recognized then that this organization was to a degree using the local community groups and the local community churches that it was allied with, and told them that they would be in charge of the project and they would actually be the sponsors of the project. And what they would do would build the shelves and build the storefront into which Fastmark and the other stores would move. And therefore the community would get a sense that it owned the situation. But yet, the bulk of the wealth that will be gotten through the retail business will not flow through the community, but will flow out of the community. And you see that a political game was being played, because you see, if Fastmark tried to move directly into the community, the bodega boys would object to it. Yes, they're objecting to it now. The other supermarkets, the Bravos and the C-Downs and the others owned by other Asian groups would move in to block it. The Koreans would move in to block it. because they would see then that that big supermarket would threaten their existence and threaten their business. And chances are they might succeed in blocking the entrance of this giant into the city by manipulating the local politicians in doing so. And past Mark has been blocked and other large units have been blocked as a result of local activity. As a matter of fact, one of the demands that the Koreans made in the last mayoral election of the person that they were going to give their support to as mayor was that the mayor would not change the zoning patterns of New York City so as to permit large units to be within the city and compete with them as a group. They had other demands as well. So what we have is then, what you do then is go get a community group. Go get an influential church. Get an influential what? Minister. And group of people, and you claim it is the community that sponsors this party. Not who? Not Taskmaster, not the other big shade, but the community itself. And the community then runs political interference and gets the permission and pieces the parcels together. And then these big corporate systems move into the storefront as a result of the invasion. How slick. How interesting. And then they know Negroes do not have an ownership mentality. We have a jobs mentality because we've been conditioned into it ever since we came here. We think our existence depends on jobs, not ownership, not control. And you hear us talk about jobs all the time. Jobs, jobs, jobs. Never about ownership, never about control. And so these people come and say, we're going to give you 250 jobs. Oh, wonderful. This is how delightful. But do you realize how much money you're going to pay to buy those jobs? In other words, if you got a unit that's going to take out 30, 40, 50, 60 million dollars a year, one unit, that may pay its workers what? $500,000 or $2 million. Do you realize how much money you pay just so you can retain in your community $2 million bucks? See, we are so fascinated by jobs, we don't even see how much we're paid for the jobs we get. Suppose there's a business owned by an alien that earns $100,000 a year based on your spending with it. And it hires, let's say, 2 people that it pays a combined total of $20,000 a year to. What have you done? You paid that business $100,000 to give you back what? 20. And the business person does what? Takes out the other 80,000, and you've made progress because now you got 2 jobs where you did that before. This is the kind, and this is what they were. We're going to give you jobs. But you see, if you had a local resident who owned that $100,000 business and gave those 2 jobs, the whole $100,000 would do what? Remain in the community and enrich the community and become a part of the community. You just cannot be deceived because people lay a job trip on you. You want to own the job and the what? And the business. This is the source of power. This is the source of wealth. Not having some joker who's going to give you 2 pennies back for every dollar he takes out. Yes, this is the kind of game that we are being permitted to run on us. Now this foundation is planning to invade 14 inner cities across the country. Using some foundation money, but it states very clearly that it's going to only fund 30% of the project through its own money. The other 70% will be funded through regular loans, regular business loans, which means what? That these banks that ante up the money, and these investors that ante up the money will earn as a result of their investing. It's business as what? Usual. And the only thing the Negro can think about is convenience.
Job.
Yes. How convenient it is for him to go there. In the end, the neighborhood will become impoverished because those 250 jobs will not add much to the economy and to the wealth of the community. very little. The very economic structure of the surrounding neighborhood will be distorted. As the bodegas, the small businesses, other things go out of business or struggle to stay alive. So in a sense, you would have, if someone put a cathedral in the midst of a desert, you would have put this pearl in the midst of this pen. Because the neighborhood itself would not have been enriched by it, even though it may look so on the surface. In a sense, it would have been more effectively impoverished by it, because now its wealth is being sucked out more efficiently. And where did Liz get this idea from? They looked at the Fulton Mall in Brooklyn, a mall supported by black folks, a mall that handles 100,000 people a day, a mall where black people spend over $1 million a day, a mall where the 200 stores earn an average of $200 per square foot. You don't know what kind of wealth you got here. No. These malls, this mall in Brooklyn, this Fulton Mall, where black people spend money, and is like the 6th largest retail turnover area in the country. You see, you may be poor, but there are many of you. And it's this concentration of poor people that makes them, in totality, outweigh the wealth and spending of suburbs which are scarcely populated. Understand? And therefore, the amount that's earned per square foot in the Fulton Mall compares very favorably with the amount that's earned in any suburban mall. In fact, the average earned per square foot in the Fulton Mall is $200. The average earned per square, and the average earned by the suburban mall is $234. See what kind of wealth you got here? And these white boys are familiar with this, but we don't study ourselves, and we don't know ourselves. We don't know our own strength. Many of the past marks in Newark, in the so-called new community in Newark, in Restoration Plaza, and so forth, out-earn suburban pass marks and pass marks outside of the city. Yes, that's why do you think pass marks wants to get in here? Why do you think Safeway wants to get into the inner city? Why do you think the others? These big companies are not going to move into areas where they think they can't earn money. They're not about charity. These are profit-making organizations. So if Pathmark is going to move down here, it's because Pathmark thinks that this is going to do what? Pay off. And it's going to stay big enough for it to do what? To be there. And Liz then studied the fact the Fulton Mall and other malls are wealth-producing. They also studied the fact that the mall markets on the outside have been saturated. And now, to a good extent, the only one left is the one right here in the inner cities. Now, what do we have here that you think I'm joking about this business of this nonprofit agency? I happened to run across a statement run in the New York Times on October 2, 1994, written by the president of the Local Initiative Support Corporation. And I found it interesting. It was titled, Inner Cities Beckon Savvy Retailers. Last month, a group of corporate investors unveiled an unprecedented fund to reestablish major supermarkets in more than a dozen poor urban areas. This is Paul Grogan, president of this nonprofit organization. And he states very clearly, but no one should confuse this effort, the retail initiative, which is an arm of that group, with philanthropy. Okay. These are his words. Did you hear what he said? That's right. But no one should confuse this effort, the retail initiative, with philanthropy. Wow. We're not in the charity game. This is not why the likes of Bank America, Bankers Trust, and GE Capital have signed on. The fund, as much as $90 million when leveraged, is a hard-headed investment tool for breaking into a surprisingly lucrative market, the inner city. Okay? To be played upon, what did I say your consciousness has to be what? Backwards. A rich people have to see themselves as what? Poor. We got so we identify ourselves as what? Poor. We associate poorness and blackness as one and the same thing. And yet every other group is out there raping and robbing us of our wealth. And we still see ourselves as what? Poor. European nations and other nations have grown rich on the poor nation of Africa, the poor nation of the Caribbean. They fought battles and wars, ones and twos and other kind of wars, in order to gain control of poor nations, in order that they grow up wealthy. And we have this ideological belief and self-concepts that have us look at ourselves as poor people. And yet others are picking our pockets at every turn. And he goes on to say, you read it right. Guys, please don't Negroes don't read the Sunday Times. Look it up, word. First, any pioneering supermarket would encounter little competition in these areas. They ain't gonna block you out. They have no concept or ideology that will permit them to block you from coming in. These are easy pickings here, baby. Years ago, see, they don't say that about the Japanese do. Let us in, bang, 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 let us in. Had old Bush throwing up on the table. Old Clinton went over there. They still couldn't win. The Chinese backed them down. Because the Chinese just don't throw their legs over to anybody to come. No. They talk to the Chinese, but they have to negotiate with the Chinese. Because the Chinese just don't let the countries fly open to anybody and everything. No, they don't do it. And they make demands for doing business there. And that's what it's about. And they are willing to even pay higher prices to protect their national interests. They don't let convenience, because the American side say, well, you let us in, the products will be cheaper, and your consumers will get these much cheaper. Chinese said, Japanese said, that's not our culture. We just don't operate on bargains. We just don't operate on what? Convenience. We just don't turn the wealth of our nation and our internal market over simply because you can say that you offer us a bargain and you can make it convenient. That may be the way you operate as Americans, but that's not the way we operate as Japanese. We hold other things dearer to ourselves than you do. And they block them out. And the Chinese and the Japanese trade balance relative to the United States is outstanding. Yes. And the United States is trying to find some way that that balance can be reduced in its favor. And it says, years ago, when the neighborhoods lost blocks and blocks of housing, supermarkets boarded up their windows and moved out. Since then, nonprofit community-based developers have rebuilt many of these areas. But the often activist resident, and it goes on here, I can't read the whole thing, and it goes on to state, he goes on to state, this gentleman here, also, despite the inner city's lower income, their high population density gives them potent buying power. As the few supermarkets that do operate in such neighborhoods prove. A Pathmark supermarket in Newark, for example, routinely outperforms many other Pathmark stores. Also ranking high in industry profitability are a Safeway in Washington, a Winn-Dixie in Miami, and a Dominick's in Chicago. And it goes on, what is the bottom line? That there are markets for the asking for urban retailing pioneers. Not only supermarkets, but banks, pharmacies, fast food restaurants, even health maintenance organizations. Do you think what's going on out here on this street is merely a struggle between people in stores and people out of stores? No. This is a major struggle for the control of wealth and property. And you got a lot of politicians who are silent on this vendor's business. That's part of this game. You got a lot of preachers who are silent on this vendor situation that are part of this game. You got a lot of these old front people, these old petty bourgeois Negroes that you find in every African nation who operate between big white capital and their own people to sell those people out for a few pennies. Yes, this is the same kind of game. Some of them even call themselves African heads of government. Yes, and others call themselves Negro elected politicians. Others call themselves real estate brokers. Yeah, who rent white folks' property for their absentee owners. And who think that by running black people out of business and discouraging them from going into business, they can bring in the big chain and other big whiteys so that they can pay fat rent, so that they can earn big commissions, while the people around these places suffer for lack of jobs and a lack of means of earning a living. This is the kind of game we have. We got a whole big game, the likes of Mobutu, who sells a whole nation of people so that he can get in a Concorde jet and take his to France.
That's right.
On 14 French chateaux. He rents a Concorde jet for $250,000 each ride. And gives away the wealth of that nation for his own personal and stupid means. And will ultimately destroy those people if he's not thrown out or destroyed in that office himself. And now we got a bunch of Negro politicians and preachers and people who want to do the very same thing within this nation, to sell the black nation out in America, to be front men for an outsiders and alien corporate interests and elite, and try to sell the people on some kind of joke that they're advancing their economic interests by handing out a few cheap jobs and by creating some little convenience store within their midst. This won't happen, and it should not be allowed to happen. I was very fascinated to find, speaking of how this game is played, to read another piece in October 26th about a mall comes to a black township. How many read that piece? I tell you, you see, I know you don't want to read the Times. You don't want to read the Wall Street Journal. You don't want to read The Economist, Foreign Affairs.
Fortune for honor.
Yeah. But I tell you, if you want to know what the game is, if you want to know how the plan is being set up, yes, this is where the people write it out. They don't hide it from me. They put it right there. We're going to do this. This is the way we want to see the world organized. This is the way we're going to manipulate the world. This is how we're going to set it up, and so forth and so on. It will be projected sometimes 10 and 15 years before that. And you have time to change it. But again, if your consciousness does not include a knowledge of the situation, does not have that kind of information in it, then you will be unable to deal with it, and you will be overrun by the future, and you will suffer from future shocks. Because the white man's game is the same the world over. The same technique, and that technique involves the use of Negro mind and the use of a falsified black consciousness as a vehicle for creating wealth and power. A mall comes to a black township. Where are they talking about? South Africa. Soweto, South Africa. It's not on 125th Street, ladies and gentlemen. It's all over the world. The article begins, Soweto, South Africa, October 23. Isn't it amazing they all happen at the same time? Yeah, the game is going on simultaneously. Because you see, these people have saturated their own market. They built, pretty much, the malls and things where they got to be built in their nation. Now, they've got to look for other places. And now they're looking at places they have overlooked. You see? And now they're going to come. That's why they're talking about diversity. That's why they're talking about educating themselves in diversity and multiculturalism. But a cheerful-eyed Negro thinks they're talking about love between humankind. These people are not talking about love when they talk about multiculturalism. They realize that they can only exist in a world that's multicultural by being able to understand it and use its culture as a basis for dominating them economically, socially, and politically. It wants to get to know you. It wants to ingratiate itself with you as a means of getting to your pocketbook, not because it has any deep and abiding respect for you as an individual or as a people. But love-starved Negroes, they respond to any hint of kindness on the part of those who abuse them. Yeah. Last year, a group of white executives from San Lam, yeah, they want white folks love more than they want, anything else. A group of white executives from San Lam Properties, a leading South African development company, piled into a minivan and rode into terra incognita. What is that? Yes, that's Latin for what? Unknown earth, unknown territory. The sprawling black metropolis of Soweto. A. Jacobus, a swing pool, Sandland's regional manager recounts that journey. It is tempting to imagine a carload of cartoon capitalists with dollar signs ringing in their eyes. Ka-chung, ka-chung. Soweto, impoverished, alien, oppressed. Did I say power? Soweto. Yes, name it. Anyway, black folk. Impoverished, alien, oppressed, babbled on Soweto. Suddenly seemed a land of untapped opportunity.
Another one?
Okay. All right. The first result of the trip materialized here on September 29th. The biggest and most modern shopping center any township has ever seen, complete with a family steakhouse, a triplex cinema, automatic telemachine, an appliance store, clothiers, and the plus ultra of suburban life in South Africa, a gun shop.
Oh,
yeah, man, after you get through buying all that stuff and you can't buy it, you shoot yourself. At the mall's heart is a vast air-conditioned ShopRite supermarket that has brought some Soweto shoppers close to joyous tears. I mean, this guy puts it right in your face. Right here. Right here. And this thing goes on, I can't read you all of it here. Soweto, which once appeared to white business as a ghetto teeming with squatters and bristling with political upheaval. Yes. All at once acquired a more enduring identity. A city of more than 3 million consumers without a grocery store, appliance dealer, a clothing outlet of national stature. Poor, oppressed people, but people who are gold mines nonetheless. You see, the same game, going over and over again. But this is not the only thing they have in mind. They're going to now develop, what is this called over here? A hyper shopping mall. Yes, yes, yes. Mr. Swingboo said that the company had 2 other township projects near announcement, including a mammoth hyper mall in another part of Soweto and another half dozen on the drawing board. What are we facing here, ladies and gentlemen? Have we been so convinced that we were so poor that we didn't study economics? Because someone convinced us that you couldn't earn money trading with black folks? You hear many of us Negro jokers. When I used to try to get investment for a shop I had right here from Negroes who had a little money. Right here on this street. Yes, and presented to them the business plan and the profitability plan. They just look at the income statements, the cash flow statements, and the other thing. The only thing they can say, well, you can't make money if you only sell to black folks. You know, that was their reason for not investing. The very idea that you're in a black community, that the largest percentage of your customers will be black people, was for them the reason why they should not invest in the business. And you've had many Negroes think along those lines. You got to sell to everybody. You got to sell to the white folks. You got to sell here. I'm not against selling to everybody and selling to white folks, but the idea that you cannot grow wealthy selling to black folks is an idea that's fixed in our minds, so that when we believe this, we lost any courage and desire to invest. While other people who didn't believe this did what? Came right in and made the money and gained the power as a result of making the money. We were so convinced that we were poor that we didn't study the arts of business, the arts of finance, the development of a financial system. We did not develop the means by which we could organize ourselves economically so that we could provide for ourselves and generate wealth based on our wealth. We studied economics when we studied and the art of finance so that we could work for white folks, so that we could work with them in exploiting African people and African wealth. This is what it's about. The same game. But at least, I have to give my white South African brothers some credit. They are raising hell. They say, wait a minute here. What is this game? As the piece goes on, but the new interest of white retailers has generated a bitter outcry from some black businessmen in the township. They complain that after decades of weathering the strain of the apartheid ghetto, black entrepreneurs were pulled aside by the economic power of white outsiders who have discovered gold in the black townships. At least they are saying something. Where are our people who are complaining about the exploitation of this community? There's a gentleman here that says, you see, and of course, they did the same thing this project is doing. They used some 40 local organizations to review their plans. States it right here. The company entered Soweto on political tiptoe. It assembled a committee of 40 local organizations to review its plans. It created a trust fund, you see, and it used the group to do what? Run political interference. And then it promised the Negroes a few jobs. And then it gave 2 of them a business out of 68 stores. But one black man down there, Mr. Lagodi, African, says, we feel that appointing a few black faces in ShopRite doesn't give you a passport to come in and exploit the emerging black market. Okay? See, some Negroes think it's all right as long as Woolworth hires some managers, black managers, black clerks. As long as they hire a few black faces on white power, we'll let them take everything we got. Mr. Gama pointed out that his black chain stores had remained in business, this is the black South African, without laying off workers, despite political violence that scared away customers and drove the company repeatedly to the brink of bankruptcy. He fumed at the thought of white companies now reaping the dividends of the struggle. And we're going to see this kind of game occur. You devastate a community. You suck it dry on one hand. And then you turn yourself around after a period of time to come back and rape it again. And this is the same kind of game. These banks of America, this Bankers Trust, these chemical banks, and the other banks who are moving one branch out of this community after another, deserting the community. Now, in a stroke of good conscience, are going to move back into the community and help themselves again to it. White businesses know the devastation of apartheid wouldn't leave them. That's what it is. White businesses know the devastation of apartheid wouldn't leave them any competition. It is a walkover for them. Isn't that what Brogan was saying? We can just walk right in and take right over. Because we have let American apartheid do what? Devastate the African nation in America. So apartheid, after you have excluded us from credit, after you've excluded us from developing the kinds of businesses and other skills that we need, and now we're going to let you in simply because you've run out of space in your own community. You want to come back in now and soak us again, and we, in the name of multiculturalism and Christian love and charity, are going to permit you just to come right on in and take everything out? Yeah, but we got that kind of crew. This is one of the reasons why, and the black business persons over there in the black community should not even be debating this question in South Africa. It should be a part of black South African policy. Yes. But why? Why are they debating this? Why are these people planning to move into this black South African community? For the same essential reason that they're moving into our community. Because Nelson Mandela and those who run these nations are people who operate on a false economic ideology, and more so than that, on a false religious ideology. They have the slave religion of their masters in their hearts. I don't care if it's Christian or Muslim. Any people who have the religion of their masters are going to be manipulated by it. Yes, they have a religious ideology. And you've got Nelson Mandela up there talking, let's forget the past. You know who loves Mandela? To death, Bob Grant. Yes. He loves Mandela day and night. And you know if Bob Grant loves Mandela, something's wrong. You know that. Why does he love Mandela? Because Mandela refused to redistribute that wealth.
Right.
And he sat up there and told the South African people to forget the past that damaged them in so many ways, the past that it will take them generations to overcome. He tells them to act as if that past never occurred. Yes, it's some kind of false religiosity. It was not his bony role, and he did not have the authority to stand up there and leave the wealth that these people had stolen in the hands of these thieves. But some Negro Christians, both here and abroad, thought he did the right thing because they confused even their own Christian ideology. Because they confused forgiveness with justice. They think forgiveness and justice are the same thing. Mandela forgave those people, but he did not demand what? Justice. And often forgiveness can block justice being done. That's why you don't forgive too rapidly. No, sir. It is not only Christians who forgive, it is also Christians to be what? Just. He did not demand justice. I saw the mockingly say, suppose I see you walking down the block and I grab your pocketbook with your life savings in it. And as soon as you reach to get it back, I say, let's forget the law. Let's not think about it anymore. Let's be brothers and sisters. Let's form a multicultural nation. Yes. Oh, no. You forget that. You know, I think your pocketbook is bad. Isn't that a wonderful con game? Just go down and grab the people's money. Forget the pot. Forget the bad. You know? And this is what he's done. In trying to be magnanimous, he is telling these people, even though these people have stolen your wealth, even though they have accumulated tremendous advantages, wealth, property, human resources, human capital, all kinds of comforts and everything else based on their past behavior, forget that and let them do what? Keep it.
Do it again.
Yes, let them keep it. Let them keep it. Yes. And now he's going to produce a raceless society, a meritocratic society, where people will be not judged in terms of their color or their creed. Okay? And now they can take this accumulated wealth, the wealth they use by killing and enslaving African people, the wealth they use by taking the property of the African people and exploiting them mercilessly, they now are permitted to keep this wealth with a clean conscience, and now they are allowed to enter into the free market from which African people were restricted for hundreds of years and not permitted to participate. And in the name of multiculturalism in the new South Africa, they can take that wealth and come and own the land and property and steal the other wealth that African people have because some ideological joke got it wrong.
Got it wrong. Free and here now.
When you forgive without demanding justice, you reward injustice. So not only were the white South Africans so-called forgiven, they were paid and rewarded for their injustices.
famous slavery.
You cannot believe how do you as so-called black Christians fall for this baloney? Because you see, the white folks teach you one theology while they teach themselves another. Right. That's why they use the same religion and the same God to capture you and enslave you and say God permitted them to do it. You use the same one to lay down and crawl in the dirt and let them walk over you and claim that they're walking over you is a sign of your religiousness. Yes. That's why we let these Arabs enslave us. Come and steal our people and enslave our people and sell our people. And then shut up that religion.
Yeah.
And they too come right in, the Arabs, right into Africa and own the shops and own the businesses. And some Negroes hollering, Allahu Akbar! While he's not giving them a break. And use the religion to justify letting another people who enslaved them own and control the economy.
That's right.
Because you've been taught the wrong religion is the wrong way. In Nelson Mandela's forgiveness, the victimization of African people is punished. These people are now being punished for being victims. In the African situation all across the world, no good deed shall go unpunished.
That's right. That's right.
And no good, no bad one shall go unrewarded. That seems to be the way the deal is set up.
That's what it looks like. That's it.
When you forgive before you demand justice, not only do you reward injustice, the injustice continues and it increases. And the inequality produced by injustice continues and increases. And therefore the accumulated wealth that whites have gathered as a result of their injustices will now be used to maintain the original inequalities that was characteristic of their original society. So rich white folks, powerful white folks that were rich and powerful during apartheid will be rich and powerful white folks in this new South Africa.
That's right.
And if the inequality of power and wealth was a major source of problem and violence in the black community, it will continue to be a major source of poverty and violence. It's still going to go on. I got to close it. My brother asked me to close it here. But I just want to bring your attention to another little piece quickly here. November 4, 1994, Dangerous Young Lions. Nelson Mandela talked about these young men. In a speech last spring, President Nelson Mandela lamented the transformation of what his African National Congress called young lions. The youth in the township have over the decades a visible enemy, that is they had, the government. Now that the enemy is no longer visible, that's what they think, because of the transformation that is taking place. Their enemy is, and this is Nelson, their enemy is now you and me, people who drive a car and have a house. In other words, there's a great increase in crime rates going on there, and where it's dangerous for you to even drive a car down the highway. I have caught people, just the young men, people that pull you right out of it, strip you down and drive away with it. And they get carjacking and other kinds of so-called black-on-black violence.
They want justice.
So what did we say then? Because these people were forgiven, they were permitted to keep their wealth, and the inequality was permitted to continue. Then the problems associated with inequality, violence, poverty, unemployment, and so forth, the problems associated with that will continue. So in this instance, forgiving these whites, forgetting the past, did not resolve a problem. It has done what? Created new problems. Just as removing these vendors from these streets is not going to resolve the problem of crime and violence in the black community. And family instability is going to do what? Increase them. And while you have your righteous Christian forgiveness and your multicultural non-colorism, you are at the same time generating problems of crime and criminality. I will tell you that your greatest problem
will be not that of getting into world work unobstructed by vendors. You will be able to walk down the street without having your head knocked over by your own children from whom you have robbed of their wealth and of their inheritance. Yes, you will be in no way running these vendors off the street, in no way not owning this street is going to contribute to peace and harmony. There is no peace without what? Justice. You hear it all the time. And the essence of justice is reparation.
Yes.
The essence of justice is redistribution.
Yes.
The essence of justice is to pay for damages done.
Yes.
And the white South African, as well as the white American, as well as whites all over this world, must reparate the injuries that they've done to the African people of this earth. Their wealth must be redistributed if thou is to be brought about. And if they don't do it, and they're not going to do it, then we will have to do it for them. Yes. What are you going to get as a result of this forgiveness? Mandela and black politicians? A greatest class stratification within the black community. Yes. You're going to create this idea now that we are all equal, that we shouldn't look at each other in terms of race, that we are in a free market, everybody has an equal chance to do this, and yet everybody you see going into it are white folks, Asian folks, other folks. So, but you're going to tell your children that race is not responsible for this. And yet, they're not going to see their race as being the ones in charge. This then raceless society, this colorless society, strangely enough, is going to increase the level of self-blame and self-hatred in the black community. Because when you tell people that that races are no longer operating, that they're no longer being restricted by another group, and yet they do not see themselves as succeeding and making it, and people like themselves as succeeding and making it, then they are going to turn around and do what? See themselves as deficient, blame themselves, and hate themselves, and say that it must be something about us, the reason why we can't make it, because there's no one out there holding us back. We are free now. The reason that depends on race. You see? So you're going to get this contradiction that at the very point where the world appears to be becoming raceless, you're going to get a race of people suffering ever more deeply and becoming ever more self-hating and becoming ever more violent in terms of these kind of contradictions you have today going on in this society. There are many of them occurring at this point. You tell people now they got a right, they can make it in the world, and so forth, and then you disinvest their schools. They can be anything they want to be, and then you don't give them the means by which they can be what they want to be. That's why you tell them if they're not what they want to be, they like values. They like a family background. You don't tell them they like a chem lab in the school. You don't tell them they like a computer lab. You don't tell them that their school is up to date and so forth, and things like this. No, it's their absence of value. It's something about what? Them. Individually and ethnically. And now this is what the South Africans will be told. Now check out what's going on in the suburbs of South Africa. You know what's happening in the suburbs of South Africa? Same thing happens over here. I'm saying this for these multicultural Negroes. Those ones who's going to forgive and forget. Yes. You know, I tell you, if you're going to be multicultural, be really multicultural. Demand that these other people live here then. Yeah. Demand that they be members of your church. Demand that they go to the same schools your children go to.
Check it out.
Demand that they contribute to the institutions that are necessary for socializing your children. Demand that they generate jobs and so forth for the people. Then you can start it, but you don't demand that, yet you call yourself a multiculturalist. Your multiculturalism only amounts to the fact that you want to let them in here take your money and then go home. You just want to see a mix of merchants in this place. And you call that multiculturalism. If
If it is a truly multicultural neighborhood, they would live here and work here and play here and die here. And if they can't do that, then they don't deserve to get the wealth that's here. I got you, Brother X. I'm coming out of here. Just a quick reading with these Negroes. The suburbs of South Africa stay cold to black. November 3rd. That's all this love and forgot the past business. After the cage of apartheid began to open up, why does a cage bird sing? And the borders of his existence were no longer the parked roads of Soweto. Vusi Magabela found a peach-colored house in a white promised land with rose bushes and a two-car garage. These people are ready to wax elegant when they come. It was there that he knelt with his family in a corner of his bedroom to thank the ancestors for his family's good fortune. He sprinkled tobacco on the carpet, as the ancestors must have their snuff, and marked the sacred spot with his deceased father's walking stick. Outside, he planted a tiny sapling, which he named Watch Us Grow. The next day, a for sale sign went up at the house next door. The people on the other side left a few months later. He never caught their name. Soon, more and more middle-class Sowetans replaced the departing whites. Now, 2 years later, his suburban town of Naturena in the Red Rock Hills, 2 miles east of Soweto, has begun to feel like the Soweto without poverty. And it goes on to talk about this kind of situation. When are you going to give up these fantasies? You're going to laugh at white folks.
Did they move out? Didn't they move
And be the same as they. When are you going to give up these fantasies that other people are going to forget who they are ethnically and so forth, and deal with the real politics of the world? When are you going to give up these wrong-headed religious ideological beliefs and face the reality that justice is also a religious demand? That's why you got something called hell, isn't it? Right? Hell says that people pay for what? Their injustices in life. That they pay for what? Their sins. The essence of balance is there. That, hey, something has got to be paid for. You just can't get away with it and get away and just go right into heaven. And we're trying to let these whites get into heaven, even though they've committed dastardly sins and so forth. I will end here then by saying, and all of this, if what I've talked about tonight, and if the coming genocide of our people, and that is a great possibility, is the result of our ideological orientation, the way our mind and consciousness is constructed, then we need to change our mind and our consciousness. And we need to change our culture. Black American culture is not the appropriate culture for us. All right? Even though you may think it's great, you may think it's wonderful, the reason why I say that is because it's filled with too many reactionary elements and too much ego-defensive behavior. Singing the blues instead of taking care of business. Talk about how a cage bird sings instead of singing a war song and tearing up the cage and tearing up the person's name. We can't have a culture this way. A culture, like anything else, has got to be measured empirically. It doesn't matter even if it was present in Africa 500 years ago. To say something is African is no justification for keeping it. To say something is black is no justification for keeping it. It has to be measured. Or get some kind of standard. Again, you Christians know what that empirical measurement is, don't you? Your Jesus told you what? You shall know a fruit by what? You shall know a tree by what? The fruit is there.
Huh? That's an empirical measure. He just didn't say have faith and forget about it. He said you can measure the value of something. You can measure the value of something by looking at the fruit it bears. And if it does not bear any fruit, what did he say? It is good for nothing but to be cut down and thrown into the flames. Isn't that what he told you? You don't read your own Bible. That's why you messed up. Yes. And so he says that you can measure the value of a religion. You can measure the value of a system by looking at the fruit it bears. And if it bears no fruit and can only bear bitter fruit, then you should throw it away. You should burn it down and throw it up and throw it away. That's what it's about. I like to stir it down tongue.
Plagued by tokenism.
Jesus walked in there, supposedly. Everybody else dropped on their knees. God is around. Thomas said, hey, wait a minute here. Check you out. Hold your hand. See if there's some stain there. Let me look at the side. Let me see this. Huh? He just been going what? Superficial belief. He says, Lord, I believe, but help thou my what? Unbelief. Yes. What? Let me measure something here. I just can't go on. You know, Jesus Christ was walking through the fields one Sabbath, eating corn. You remember that, you Christians? And the old Orthodox Jews ran out and said, you can't do this. This is against the law. You should be hurt. And what did Christ tell them? The Sabbath is what? Made for whom? Man. Not man for the what? Sabbath. Religion is made for man. To serve man. Not man to serve religion. You must understand that. Other people use their religion to serve them. And black people serve the religion. That is why the white man can use the Christian religion to capture and enslave black people. And deceive them. And use them and control them. And black people are so busy serving the Lord, they are used and controlled and abused. And the more they sing and shout, the deeper they sink into degradation. Yes. Because they're serving the religion instead of seeing the religion as being necessary to serve them. God created religion as a service to man, not the other way around. The Arabs used Islam to serve them. They used it to penetrate Africa, to enslave African people. They used it as a means of gaining a trade advantage in Africa, the trade advantage they still on today. And black people use Islam to submit to the control of Africa. And you claim you're praying to the same God, and you're worshiping the same religion. You are not. Because it is not the name of God that matters. It's your relationship to your God that matters. Yes, we have these people who are acting in this term, and we see this kind of thing. And because you let somebody else put a false religion at the center of your consciousness and put a false religion at the center of your culture, you saw people define your culture in terms of a hand-me-down slave religion. And build yourself around it. And you wonder why then the more you pray to the Lord, the worse things get for you. And why then that the more churches you have in a block, the more crime and criminality exists. I can measure the amount of crime and criminality in a black community by counting the number of black churches within the block. The more black churches you see in the block, the more criminality and crime you see in the community. I'm telling you. The communities where there's few, little crime, violence, and so forth, you have a church every 2 to 3 miles. But communities where people are drinking and drugging and addicted and carrying on, you got a church on every 2 to 3 miles. Yes. That must tell you something here. That must tell you that the religion is not serving you, but you're serving the religion.
Yes.
You have to understand that. And this is the same kind of religious nonsense that motivates Mandela and motivates these preachers and motivates these politicians that have sold out this black community. When you let that kind of religion be at the center of your culture and be at the center of your consciousness, then that kind of religion is going to be the source of your distress instead of the source of your relief.
and the source of your protection. And I'm not talking about after you die. I'm talking about right while you're here on earth. Understand? And it's culture, it's consciousness that is the source of power. That's why you got to develop and recognize what it is. Even your own African brothers from the continent who still have a good fragment left of their culture are able to come over here to America and make it. Right in your midst. Yes, yes. Reading here out of the Washington Post, Chris Sidhueme, the 40-year-old founder of Bamboo Inn Restaurant at Georgia Avenue, talking about Washington, D.C., and Kennedy Street started in 1989 with an $8,000 loan from a local bank. Having managed the McDonald's while earning a business degree from American University, Sidhueme thought he could make it with the West African bistro. But with no credit history of his own, he needed someone to co-sign the loan. A friend from Nigeria, from Sidhueme's hometown, was happy to comply. The restaurant was a hit, and Sidhueme branched into 2 grocery stores. A logical move, he says, because more Nigerians eat food at home than in restaurants. He owns 2 stores now and is moving into the wholesale business with annual revenues of about $1 million. Sidhueme paid over $200,000 in state and local taxes, he's getting ripped off, last year, and another $600,000 in employee salary. He expects to become a U.S. citizen next year. Come on, what the guy ain't going in. Africans, you know, and he goes on here. He talks about once they get here, they're talking about Africans from the continent, they find in the black community not only the camouflage, but a market for their wares and skills. And like the peddlers of the 1800s, they went deep into the provinces to what many Americans would consider hostile territory. The ghettos of Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, and New Orleans. They sold African imports to African Americans, the greatest consumers of the world. Cloth from Ghana, carvings from Zaire, even gold from the Gold Coast. The peddlers' network spawned the first African stores, which spawned further immigration. Yes, they are following the footsteps of the Jewish peddlers, Howard University Professor Nang said. The critical mass of lumping immigrants is being joined quickly by university-educated elites who are setting themselves up as real estate agents, as wholesalers, shopkeepers, and accountants serving fellow immigrants. People who are connected by what? Culture. A group consciousness. People who have an African-centered consciousness, who now use that consciousness as the basis for developing a financial system and using that financial system to advance their economic development. You see here they're coming together what we call ethnic resources. The ethnic resources that comes from being a Nigerian, that comes from being from the hometown. Those are brought together with what we call class resources. Those Africans who've gone to the colleges and to the universities, who've learned the business and finance and accounting and other kinds of things, and they join together, those Africans who picked up skills and other kinds of things, so that they can serve their fellow men who are into retail business. And using that base to go into what? The wholesale business. And using that case to get into imports as they import their materials from Mother Africa and so forth. The same kind of plan that I recommend in Blueprints for Black Power, that the first level for black economic development involves capturing the internal market, capturing 126th Street, capturing every black street across the city. But not only doing that, capturing Fifth Avenue downtown. If people work down there, that's where they spend their money. Be down there to get it, man. There's no reason why we have to stay up down in Harlem. The whole of New York City should be seen as a market for black people, because black people are spread all over the city. And we can get to them, and we can get to white people. You need to go to business downtown, you know. Set up a big black one. It should be all black employees. And use the Negro's mind to get it. And a white man's mind. Since they think all the white folk can own this business downtown, it wouldn't matter to them if they had blacks in there. They think that they're still buying from a white man. So, you can get both the Negroes and the whites. And all the rest, these are just the servants. So there's no reason why we just can't make it up downtown, anytime, round town, uptown, all around town.
by bringing these things together. But once we get these internal markets set up, we're not about little models and department stores only. We're going to get this internal market, just as this gentleman did here with these stores. What's the next move after you get the internal market? Move into the what? The wholesale market. Because you want to serve all of these retail owners that you have, all across this city, all across this nation. You want these wholesale businesses now to do that. Now once you get into the wholesale businesses, where are you going to go from there? Into manufacturing. Because you're going to manufacture and distribute to your wholesalers, to your retailers, because you know you have a market. And where do you go then after you earn your money and your wealth from manufacturing, wholesaling, and retailing? You're going to use that wealth to buy equity into white corporations and multinational corporations and gain enough power and influence in those corporations so that you can sit on their boards and determine how the rules shall be made. So that if these corporations will rule the world, we will be a part of their rulership. They will not rule against us. They will rule for us. You understand where we're going? And after you buy equity in American corporations and so forth, you're going to get engaged in the export trade. You're going to become world traders and international dealers. You're going to invest in Africa. You're going to invest in Asia. You're going to invest wherever you can because you're going to supply these jobs for your children. You're going to stabilize these families. You are going to become a major economic factor and force in the world. Today, the world is being divided into 3 regions, and it's being dominated by 3 regions. The region of Western Europe, which is using Eastern Europe as its manufacturing base increasingly. A region now called the North American region, which plans to use Mexico, Central and South America as its low-wage manufacturing belt, as its high productive, low-wage manufacturing belt, and East Asia. These 3 giants will be the control of the world's economy. What do we have left out there? Africa and African people. No African trade bloc, no African economic bloc. An Africa that is going to be ripped apart and raped and exploited by these other 3 groups. While some Negro is talking about multiculturalism and diversity. The Asians are so strong until the white boys have predicted that they will be the preeminent economic power before the turn of the century. The United States and Europe will be secondary power. What did I warn you of before? Are you going to get this white man's foot off your neck only to have the Asian foot put back on it? This is what is going on out here today. You must become part of a Pan-African economic, political, and economic system. This is the only route to our survival as a people the world over. And if we are to do that, we must transform this thing that we call our culture. We must reinvent it. We must radically change the way we relate one to the other. I don't have time to tell you about the one that they're developing over here on 116th Street. How many of you are familiar with the African brothers and sisters over there? Last summer they stated there was one African-owned business on 116th Street. Mokhtar Ndoye's Horizon 96 Insurance Agency. Since 1993, Ndoye has been joined by nearly a dozen entrepreneurs, 4 hair-braiding boutiques, 2 restaurants, 2 groceries, a halal butcher, a travel agency, and an African craft shop. New York, Ndoye smiles, is the promised land for Senegalese. Okay? And they go on and going to talk about how this thing is going. How do they do it? They do it by the methods I talked to you about in the falsification of African consciousness, the method of what? The tontines, the method of the susu, where they combine their money together in a pot and they use that combined money. What is it they do? They use their savings as the basis for financing their growth. African American people, you don't need the Pathmarks to come in here. You don't need the white-owned businesses to come in here. You can use the same method any other people use it. Because the basis of the method is the pooling of wealth. What we call the syndication of money, where a large enough people, even with little money, if they combine that money in the correct way, can finance major economic projects. Where large numbers of people, even with small amounts of wealth, can finance major economic projects by investing in those projects. In the book, Blueprint to Black Power, I show how just by contributing a few dollars a month, we can build an underwriting agency, a national underwriting agency, worth $6 billion. And all you got to do is the way the brother does here with Black United Fund. You can tell your bank, Terminate, says, look here, I want you every month to send $4 or $3 to this underwriting company, underwriting corporation. You got 14 million black people in the workforce. Even if you could get 3 or 4 million of those people for a period of 10 months or a year for 3 years to send $4 or $5, 10 months a year, $10 a month, you would have $3 or $4 billion at your big hand by which you can finance and underwrite credit and loan and transform your economic arena. You got it right here within your grasp. And if you added on the millions of black retirees and others who can also contribute to this, it would not be long before you change over. We've done it. We have the African way. Bishop Edwards, with a congregation where 95% of the people were on food stamps, told them that they didn't have to live the way they did. Only in Meridian, Mississippi, only if they would do what? Change the way they thought. They combined their food stamps and they bought from a wholesaler. They created a store right in the church itself. Within 4 months, they were able to buy a supermarket. And soon thereafter, they were able to buy a 4,000-acre farm, to buy cattle, to buy office buildings, to buy computer facilities, to build dorms for their children, to create jobs for their people. All because they took food stamps and look at them not as tokens of poverty, but as wealth. That if they were pooled in the correct way, could be used to finance themselves out of poverty. He founded a second church, and none of the members are unemployed because the church has generated the employment partners. It has to do with the way you think. What did I say? The wealth of the nation is not in his pocket, but where? In his mind and in his head. You think you need pass marks and you need lists to build a shopping center down here? Read Leon Sullivan's 1036 plan, where he pledged to got 4,000 or 5,000 black people and 400 black churches to pledge that they would contribute $10 a month for 36 months. And he took that money and built the largest black-owned shopping center in the country. Why do you need pass marks? Why do you need the other? Because some joker is giving you a false economic ideology. And tell him, Free Street Baptist Church built 2 shopping centers. It has the largest credit union of many churches in this country. And was able to do that out of its own funds. The black community, when it had African consciousness in the 1800s, before the NAACP and these assimilationist jokers got control of black consciousness, were able to build 25 and 30 independent black cities. They tried to get a whole state, the state of Oklahoma, to themselves as a people. They built the cities of Tulsa, a great black metropolis, but Tulsa was only one of many. Durham, the other Black Wall Street of America. Atlanta, Sweet Albany Street. Kansas City, Chicago. The blacks were building for themselves as long as they maintained an African consciousness. But somehow we permitted some jokers to come in, called the advancement of colored people, and Urban League, and some other jokers who love their white masters more than they love themselves, and twisted the consciousness of black people and diverted black people from economic development and brought us to the path that we are in today. We have it in us. We have the example. Blacks have the longest history of entrepreneurship of any non-white group on this country. We have a glorious history, but we are not familiar with it. The thing that's interesting about it is that it occurred. Blacks in L.A. protesting, the time when that Korean woman shot that black girl in the back of her head, on video, given probation. They marched around there for a while protesting, and just like these Negroes did over here in Brooklyn and carrying on. And man said, hey, that's why somebody got here this. Why are we marching like this? Why don't we create wealth? our own. Now some people say, well, now you got to get a business plan, and you got to go down to the white folks bank, and you got to go to this, or you got to go to the Small Business Administration, or you got to go, you know, to the loan fund in the community. They got 10,000 strings attached to it, and it gives you just enough money to fail. But they didn't do that. You know what they did? Something very simple. They went directly to the community and raised $500,000. Yes, just by asking the people to contribute to the building of convenience stores for themselves, owned by themselves. And now they're going to take the profits from that store and build 5 other centers. And take the profit and contribute to community institutions, education, and other kinds of things. Very simple. But you see, your ideology can get you screwed up so badly until you can't think of what? The simplest thing to do. The most obvious thing to do. But they were able to do it. We can do it, ladies and gentlemen. You want to compete with Pathmark? Sell food as low as Price Mark or lower than Pathmark? Create a big cooperative food market. Do it. Any number of black churches with their members, signing on their members, can build a giant cooperative right in this city. You can sell to your members for almost near wholesale prices. You can compete with Sam's Club, anybody else's price club, anytime you want. Think of the idea that you would create across America 100 of black cooperatives. And think of having one major buyer over those cooperatives. Think of the kind of economic power you can wield with the and with all the young people when you got millions of dollars in your hand. And think of what you can do with it if you do it. But you got to do what? Change your way of thinking. Change the values. Change the way you see yourself. Change the way you relate to each other. And once you do these kinds of things, once you change your consciousness, then you will triumph and you will be self-determining and you will be out. Thank you kindly.
Okay, family, I just want to make a couple of announcements for you guys leave. Our next lecture is going to be November 21st this month, and it's going to be Professor Scobie, and his topic will be reparations. I'd like to also thank Brother Amos Wilson for coming out this evening and for sharing with us, you know, the time that he has to get off the stage. You know, I could listen to this brother forever, you know, and we need to get behind this brother. I understand he has a business side. Talk to him about it if you want to get involved with him. Also, that concept that he talked about with the food co-op, in our lecture series here. So for those of you